Concert of Europe stopping the Philly virus. From the moment that the Marquis de Lafayette and thousands of other Frenchmen landed on the North American continent to help America in its struggle for freedom against King George III and the British Empire, a deadly virus began to incubate in their hearts and minds. A virus that would also be taken back to nations like Poland and Prussia as young noblemen from around Europe flocked to the cause of liberty. What would they do with it when they returned home? Because they were leaving American style democracy in the colonies. When the war was over and American liberty was guaranteed, these men went back home to their kings, kings who were like King George III. They were monarchs who were not used to sharing power. These were absolute monarchs who deplored the ideas of the Enlightenment, rulers who had sided with liberty in America because it weakened England and because America was thousands of miles away. But leaders like Louis XVI gravely underestimated the influence and power that the Philly virus would have on men like Lafayette, who had served with Washington for several years. So much influence so that when the revolution began with the storming of the Bastille, the key to the front door of the Bastille did not go to a French museum. Rather, it was sent across the Atlantic to the Father of Liberty for safekeeping. Liberty, equality, and fraternity were the three bywords of the revolution. These three words that sounded amazing in the writings of Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Voltaire. These three words looked inspiring on signs and placards and protest parades throughout the streets of Paris. The problem was not everyone had the same understanding of what these glorious words meant. Napoleon's reign of France did nothing to clarify the meaning or place that those three words had in Europe. While he did take his 1804 Code Napoleon to all the nations that he conquered, abolishing serfdom, allowing for expanded education and a meritocracy where man could earn his way to the top without the benefit of the good name, changes that the common people of Europe welcomed even though they were short-lived. So after Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, diplomats met in Vienna to create an antidote for the Napoleons of the future. Led by Austria, the nation most often humiliated by Napoleon's armies, they created the Concert of Europe, designed to put all the kings of Europe back in power, prevent all revolutions, and to make sure France was never the main threat to continental peace again. This meant that Metternich and his companions fell back on the balance of power theory and the use of alliances such as the Holy Alliance between Russia, Prussia, and Austria to keep the peace. They also realized that the teaching and liberal teachings of the Enlightenment were not going to go away. They were too popular, and the basic tenets of freedom had spread to universities, popular literature, and popular music. So they passed the Carlsbad decrees in 1819 that put stringent limits on the freedom of speech and even the existence of certain student groups at German Confederacy universities. The final part of the master plan was to redraw the map of Europe, rewarding nations like Prussia, England, and Russia for their part in defeating Napoleon. It meant that nations like the Netherlands and Poland lost territory without having anything to say in the process. The problem with trying to kill the Philly virus is that, like all viruses, it mutates and continues to live with a mind of its own. Another challenge is that this is a mental virus and it is impossible for fear and coercion, no matter how extreme, to kill an idea. So France and other nations in Europe continued to be rocked by one level of revolt after another. Even England with the reform laws were not able to avoid violent protest altogether. More fuel is added to the fire when Karl Marx published his Communist Manifesto in 1848, and various degrees of socialist and communist philosophies and communes sprouted up all over Western Europe. The virus also was not able to die during the decades between Waterloo and Sarajevo in 1914. The conservative leaders that designed the concert system and were left in charge of enforcing it wanted peace on their terms. This meant they stayed in power and that there was a revolutionary movement that benefited them. They chose to side with it, such as Greece's independence from the Ottomans in 1829 at the Treaty of Adrianople. Is a prime example of a moment when revolution was deemed acceptable because it lessened Muslim influence on the continent. This pursuit of national power is truly the biggest challenge to the concert system. Alliances would change, wars would be fought, and new nations such as Germany and Italy would be created on the road to an event unthinkable in the minds of men. World War I, which is the exact thing the concert system was created to try to prevent.